Here we have the neuron, the fundamental unit of the nervous system. Let's explore the key parts and their roles. Dendrites. These are the branching extensions at the start of the neuron. They act like antennas, receiving signals from other neurons and bringing them toward the cell body. The nucleus of the neuron, found within the cell body. The nucleus contains the neuron's genetic material and directs all activities, including protein synthesis and repair. The mitochondria of the neuron are energy hungry. Well, the neurons are energy hungry. The mitochondria supply ATP, the fuel required to transmit signals, maintain ion gradients, and support overall function. Axon hillock. This is a cone-shaped region where the cell body meets the axon. It serves as a decision point, integrating incoming signals to determine whether an action potential will be triggered. Here. And then we have the initial segment. And right after the axon hillock, the initial segment is where action potentials usually begin, thanks to a high concentration of voltage-gated sodium channels. And then here we have the axon going across. It's a long fiber that carries electrical impulses away from the cell body and towards other neurons, muscles, or glands. And covering the axon, we have myelin sheath. This insulating layer produced by Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system wraps around the axon and speeds up signal transmission. And also in the central nervous system, it would be the oligodendrocytes. And within the myelin sheath, we have the Schwann cells. And within each Schwann cell, the nucleus directs the maintenance and production of the myelin sheath. And then we have the nodes of Ranvier, the gaps in between each myelin sheath. And these small gaps allow ions to flow in and out, enabling saltatory conduction, which makes nerve impulses travel much faster. And then at the end, we have the axon terminals. They contain synaptic vessels filled with neurotransmitters ready to pass the signal on to the next neuron, muscle, or gland. Together, these structures allow the neuron to receive, process, and transmit information rapidly and efficiently, making communication across the nervous system possible. Hello everyone, today I'll be presenting some of the major anatomical structures of the brain, starting with the cerebral cortex and then moving into the meninges. We'll begin with the frontal lobe. Located at the front of the brain, the lobe is associated with higher cognitive functions like reasoning, planning, and voluntary motor control. Separating the two cerebral hemispheres is a longitudinal fissure, a deep groove that runs along the midline of the brain. Just anterior to the central sulcus is a precentral gyrus, which contains the primary motor cortex responsible for initiating voluntary movement. Behind it, we find the central sulcus in the middle, the prominent groove that divides the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Posterior to this sulcus is a postcentral gyrus, home to the primary somatosensory cortex, which processes sensory information such as touch and pressure. Moving further back, we come to the parietal lobe, which is involved in processing sensory input and spatial awareness. Separating the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe is the parieto-occipital sulcus, a clear landmark that helps define the boundary. The occipital lobe at the posterior part of the brain is primarily responsible for vision. On the lateral surface, we see the lateral sulcus, which separates the temporal lobe right here from the frontal and parietal lobes, frontal and parietal. And then we got the temporal here. So beneath the lateral sulcus, we have the temporal lobe, important for auditory processing and memory. Hidden deeper within the lateral sulcus is the insular lobe, which plays a role in functions like taste, visceral sensation, and emotional awareness. Connecting the two hemispheres internally is the corpus callosum, a large bundle of commissural fibers that allows communication between the left and right side of the brain. The posterior base of the cerebrum is a transverse fissure, which separates the cerebrum from the cerebellum. Right here. Alright, now let's move on to the meninges, the protective coverings of the brain. The outermost layer is the dura mater, which you see here. A tough, durable membrane that provides structural support. Deep to that is arachnoid matter, a thin web-like membrane that helps cushion the brain directly adhering to the surface of the brain is the pia mater, a delicate layer that closely follows the contours of the cerebral cortex. Within the derm mater, there are several important folds. The falx cerebri is a sickle-shaped fold that extends into the logical fissure, separating the two cerebral hemispheres. The tentorium cerebelli from a horizontal partition, separating the occipital lobes from the cerebellum. Into lab 2, we're talking about the diencephalon today. So first we have the corpus callosum, which is the commissural fibers that connects the two hemispheres together. You see in this white thick layer, and below that we have the fornix. You see this red little area, and then we have the pineal gland, which the pineal gland is going to be in the back posterior part of the thalamus, or diencephalon, and this produces and secretes melatonin. And then after that we have the thalamus, which is this center area. And then we have an intermediate adhesion, which connects the thalamus from both cerebral hemispheres. And then below here, on the anterior portion, we have the hypothalamus, which helps with regulating our temperature and our hunger, our thirst. And then here, we have the mammillary bodies tucked in there. And then we have the pituitary gland out here. And the infundibulum is a stalk that connects it to the hypothalamus. And where the green pin is here, we have the anterior commissure. It is a bundle of white tracts located at the anterior aspect of the corpus callosum, which is right here. And then this helps connect the right and temporal lobes together. And that is it for the diencephalon. Thank you very much. Hello, welcome back. We are going to talk about the brainstem. So first we have the midbrain, located right here. And this has the cerebral peduncles, which help support and connect the brainstem to the higher part of the brain. And then we have, behind it, we have the superior colliculi. The superior colliculi helps with our eyes and vision. If we see something, it alerts us. And then inferior colliculi would be auditory. And then we have the pons, which is the belly of the seahorse. And below the pons, we have the medulla oblongata, which would be right here. And then we have the pyramid tracts, which cross both the cerebral hemispheres to the left and right side of the bodies. And then we have the olives, which are located right in here, this red little area.
This is the cerebellum. This is the vermis right here in the middle. Right here is the arbor vitae. And then right here is the folia.
Doing with the cerebellum, we have the anterior lobe, posterior, the horizontal fissure, and then this little thing right here. That's the flocculonodular lobe. Yeah, thank you.
Now let's take a journey through the ventricular system of the brain, the network of cavities that produces and circulates cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. The lateral ventricles, you see here at the top, are the very top of the system, and they are paired with each other, one in each cerebral hemisphere. These large C-shaped chambers are the main reservoirs where cerebrospinal fluid is produced. So from each lateral ventricle, fluid flows through a narrow passage called the interventricular foramen, this hole, sometimes called the foramen of Monroe. This is a gateway into the third ventricle. The third ventricle will be right here. And the third ventricle sits in the midline of the diencephalon, nestled between the two halves of the thalamus. It acts as a central chamber, collecting fluid from both lateral ventricles. So we got the third ventricle here, foramen there, and then we have the cerebral aqueduct, which is cerebrospinal fluid flows from the third to the fourth ventricle. So from here, the CSF travels to the cerebral aqueduct, a slender canal running through the midbrain. The aqueduct is the only connection between the third and fourth ventricles. Fourth ventricle. The next fluid enters the fourth ventricle, located between the brainstem in front and the cerebellum behind. The ventricle acts as a hub directing CSF toward the spinal cord and the outer surface of the brain. And here we have the medium aperture. One exit from the fourth ventricle is the medium aperture, also known as the foramen of Mangindi. The opening allows fluid to flow into the central cistern, bathing the base of the brain. And then we have the lateral apertures, here and here. These are two more exits that direct CSF outward to the subarachnoid space and around the brain. Together, this system of ventricles and openings ensures the cerebrospinal fluid continuously flows, cushioning the brain, delivering nutrients, and clearing away waste. All right, class, let's explore the spinal cord, its internal structures, and protective coverings. Anterior medium fissure. Where's the anterior medium fissure?
I have no idea.
You don't know? Okay, so anterior medium fissure is gonna be on the anterior side. So it's gonna be this gap here. We always know that by the spinous process that this is gonna be posterior. So the fissure is a deep cut that goes all the way down the spinal cord. And then we have the posterior median sulcus, which is gonna be right at the end, the posterior part of the spinal cord, which is going to be a more shallow cut. And then we have the posterior gray horns. Inside the spinal cord, the gray matter forms an H shape. The posterior gray horns extend toward the back and contain sensory neurons that receive incoming signals. So we see these gray horns right here that come all the way to the back of the spinal cord. And then we have the posterior white columns. Surrounding the gray matter is white matter. The posterior white columns located behind the gray horns carry sensory information up the brain. So we see these columns, the white matter. So now in the central part of the spine, we have the central canal where the cerebrospinal fluid flows. And then we have the dorsal roots on the dorsal ends of the spine. And these bundles of axons carry sensory information from the body into the spinal cord. And then we have the dorsal root ganglion right here. On each dorsal root sits a swelling, which is called the dorsal root ganglion. This contains the cell bodies of sensory neurons. On the front side, we have ventral roots carrying motor signals from the spinal cord out to the body's muscles and glands. And now we have the protective layers of the spinal cord. First, we have the pia mater, the innermost layer. And this is the delicate membrane that clings tightly to its surface. And then we have the subarachnoid space, where the cerebrospinal fluid flows. And then on top of that, we have the arachnoid matter. And it's a web-like membrane that helps support the cord in place. And then we have the subdural space between the arachnoid matter and the dura mater. And this, you see this gap right here. And then on top of that, we have the dura mater. On the outside, it's a tough protective layer that provides strength and stability. And then, of course, we have the epidural space, which is the skin. Features the spinal cord as it extends through the body. First, we have the cervical enlargement, and then we have the lumbarosacral enlargement, and then we have the conus medullaris, which is the terminal end of the spinal cord. And then we have these kind of spaghetti hair-like extensions, which is the cauda equina. And then further down, we have the filum terminale at the very end. And this filament here anchors the spinal cord to the coccyx, keeping it stable within the vertebral column. That's it.
Using Tim here as my model to describe the spinal cord. There are 5 regions of the spinal cord. Up at the top, from C1 to C8, we have the cervical region, and then that has 8 pairs. The thoracic region of the spinal cord has 12 pairs, and that goes from T1 to T12. And then the lumbar has 5 pairs down here at the bottom, and that one has the regions from L1 to L5. Then we have the sacral region. This is a fused region of the spinal cord that has 5 pairs going from S1 to S5. And then right here at the very bottom is the coccygeal, which is one pair of the spinal cord, and that is CO1. There are three types of plexuses throughout the body in the spinal cord: the cervical plexus, brachial plexus, and the lumbosacral plexuses. In the cervical plexus, we have the phrenic nerve right here. And then there are a few nerves that are important. So here are this is the auxiliary nerve, and then the musculocutaneous, median nerve, radial, and ulnar. The lumbosacral nerves, right here we have the genitofemoral nerve, right here is the obturator, and then we also have the pudendal nerve down here at the bottom.
It's not hard to edit.
This big nerve right here is the sciatic nerve, and this right here is the femoral, right? Okay. And then down here, this nerve is the common fibular, and down when the sciatic nerve comes down, it meets at the knee and becomes the tibial nerve. Lastly, we have the cranial nerves. First, up here, this purple dot is showing the olfactory nerve, which is sensory. And then this tan dot is showing the optic nerve, which is also sensory. In here, we have the oculomotor, which is a motor nerve. And then the green dot out here is the trochlear nerve. On the outside, the orange dot is showing the trigeminal. And then we have the last three, which are below the pons and go alphabetical from medial to the outside. From the abducens nerve, which is motor, to the facial, which is mixed, and the vestibulocochlear nerve on the outside.